everybody. So I'm finally getting a chance to redo that video with my husband, but before I begin, I just want to address some douchebaggins, some people that are freaking leaving stupid ass comments in the last video that I made. And you know, I figured that was gonna happen because I remember like back in the day when I made videos like that, like several years ago, videos addressing, you know, topics regarding you know, heavy topics, you know, rape type topics, molestation type topics, and I used to get tons of stupid troll comments. So I'm not surprised. And before I continue, just want to let you know my daughter is not in the car with us right now. My son is knocked out sleeping. My daughter is actually at her aunt's house. So yeah, so if you hear, you know, cuss words and everything like that throughout the video, don't think that we're here just saying crazy stuff around, you know, the kids and whatnot. Not that things don't slip around the kids, but anyhow, that's not the point. So I wanted to address those idiots because, you know, I mean, again, I figured they were going to do that. And, you know, people that are just totally veering off the conversation, and people that are just, you know, always bringing up, you know, Puerto Rican women, and you're like, I don't understand. It's like, you know, there's so many channels with Latin women that just, you know, cater to you guys, you know, in every way, shape, or form, you know, and they just do and say everything that you want them to do. I just don't understand when you just don't just stay over at those platforms and like stay the hell away from mine, you know? I don't understand that. It is what it is, though. Just, you know, some things are just not to be understood, I guess. Anyhow, so yeah, I figured I would ask my husband a few questions regarding, I guess this would be considered geopolitics, right? Just kind of talking about Chinese politics, because you know, throughout the years, I've watched different content creators on YouTube, you know, different sectors of YouTube, different parts of YouTube or whatever, and people have a lot to say with regards to China, the Chinese government. So anyhow, one of the main things I wanted to talk about is, what would you say, or what can you say in regards to the Chinese government and their I guess their take, their influence, and what they're doing in Latin America?
Okay. So by no means am I a Chinese expert. But I guess I'd be more of an expert than someone that's not Chinese. That doesn't make sense either, right? But I'll start from somewhere. So let me think. You know, there's a lot of like pushback, and I would say that's really negative pushback when there's Chinese ventures outside of China. And I will say this: a lot of deals are struck with the governments, foreign governments, and the terms are created by the foreign governments, not the Chinese. The Chinese either agrees or disagrees, or would say, look, let's modify this line or that line, and that's the agreement. You know, these people's governments are the people who make that stuff up. As far as what China is doing in Latin America, I would say there's the obvious, and the obvious is resources. What resources are we talking about? We're talking about shit that's in the things that are in the dirt, you know, metals and food. Because supposedly there's a food shortage in China, but if you go to China, you wouldn't notice that there's a food shortage. So there's a narrative that the Western media is definitely trying to play up with that. But yeah, so let's talk about the perspective of the loans for a moment. When there's Chinese ventures overseas or loans, it's never because the Chinese are out there throwing money around. They're out there only because those countries have gone to China and say, hey, look, can you help us out? You see that prevalent throughout Latin America, Africa, and even other parts of Asia. So the reason why the Chinese government, or why other governments go to the Chinese government for money, or to Chinese businesses for loans, or whatever you want to call it, is because they've already gone to the Western institutions. They've gone to America. They've gone to the European Union, and they've gotten denied. They've gotten denied, or they've gotten all that they the only ones that are available with pockets that's deep enough are the Chinese.
Got it.
So that's why the Chinese are doing business with other people. Chinese people ain't going out. The Chinese government ain't going out there and saying, hey, I got some money. You want some?
Right.
That's not how it's working.
Right.
It's because other people reached out first.
Right.
Now, what's the incentive for China to be involved? So, as I've already stated, it's primarily resources, right? You know, there's stuff in Latin America, Africa that's coming out the dirt, and it's also for food. Now, the other thing is, when people go to China, one of the main things that China wants out of all this are votes at the UN Security Council. Or they want you to recognize that China, the PRC, is the actual Chinese government, not Taiwan. So the way how you can view, let me try to describe how you can view China and Taiwan. So Taiwan is a small island, right? I'm not pro or against anything, because that's not me, and that's not my politics. I'm not involved with that. But the way how you can view China and Taiwan is that Taiwan, like let's say the size of Taiwan is like, I don't know, Alaska is probably too big, so let's say Hawaii. That is probably the size of Taiwan. You can travel Taiwan in less than a day, in a few hours. That's how small Taiwan is. And Taiwan wants to claim itself as the Chinese government. Meanwhile, what about the rest of China? The rest of China is huge compared to that. But anyhow, that is what the Chinese government wants. The Chinese government wants the recognition. So, for example, in 2016, when China started having investments in Dominican Republic, let's say, all they wanted from Dominican Republic was the acknowledgement of this is the real China, not that. And that's what happened.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, you know, people are not really familiar with why these deals are struck. So, you know, we can take a look at the pros and the cons of everything, right? And one of the pros that I would use as an example is always going to be Kenya, because it seems like that was the only government that whenever they struck a deal with the Chinese government, always thought about their peoples, and it was never like to the extent of where people were lining up their pockets. So if you look at the infrastructure that was built on Chinese investments in Kenya, they got the railway system now. They got skyscrapers. That shit transformed Kenya into modern times. Now, let's take a look at another government. Let's talk about Venezuela for a hot minute. Venezuela. You know how many billions Chinese money went into Venezuela and really nothing popped off? It's because of corruption. Primarily corruption. People lined their pockets.
Right.
Okay? Now, then the second thing why it didn't work out is because Venezuela didn't have the technology, did not have the capability or the know-how to implement the project. So that was a failure there. Okay?
Right.
So those are the two main reasons why projects fail with Chinese investments. Because if you look at Chinese investments over time, you know, Chinese, and I would also say Russia as well, their investments in other country was the counterweight against what we call capitalism. All right? Yeah. And now a lot of people equate with the West being the good guys and the people out in the East, or communism, being the bad guys. But when you think about things theoretically, what is the difference between capitalism and communism? One is that one ideology believes that there should be more equity spread out amongst its peoples. And then the other one is like, get as much as you can regardless of the impact that it has on communities and people and the environment. That's capitalism. Yeah. So depending on where your perspective at is how you weigh that. You know, and then also there's a lot of distortion that happens from the media. So you gotta stay on point. There's distortion from both sides.
That's what I was gonna say. And that's one of the things that I believe is that every government is going to hype up their own, and they're going to put down others, right, to make themselves seem superior. So what we do here in this country is, you know, we uplift capitalism and we'll shun communism, and I'm pretty positive that in China they do the very same thing. You know, I would be pretty sure that they do the very same thing.
Yes, so. and to a certain extent, people don't know this. China is more of a democracy than America
is?
and I'll tell you why. So you have the Electoral College in America. In China, they don't have that.
Wow.
What they do is every vote literally counts.
Oh, wow.
So you go from village to village, city to city. Those votes
actually count.
Count.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know that. I know I didn't know that.
No, they don't know that.
Yeah.
They don't know that.
Wow.
But
that's very interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're gonna be really for the peoples, how come every vote don't count?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So let me not flip it. So that, I think I covered. No, I didn't cover enough about the loans. So more recently, in recent years, there was a transaction with Sri Lanka. So out in Sri Lanka, they couldn't pay up. So what did they do? So in order to settle their debt, they loaned out their port to China for 100 years. And a lot of people are raising flags and alarms. China is getting big. They're building military installation. It's been over a year already since they had that. Have they built out military installation? No. But who's the one that feels threatened? It's the United States. Why? Because they're the ones with the military installation all over the world. And they're the ones that want to have a monopoly on that. So even if you have one port, it's dangerous to them.
Right.
How crazy is that? The colonial mindset is deep because it's been hundreds of years that the world has felt the colonial mindset. I'm talking about from 1600, or maybe even started since 1492, right? So there is that. Now, you tell me, if someone owes you money, but you're willing to settle it with different conditions, what would you do?
It kind of... for some reason, what it made me think of is like when people owe money to people in certain areas in like the hood where they had loan sharks, and it's like then the loan shark is gonna come after you because you didn't pay them back their money at a certain time or a certain amount. Say hi to the cows.
They're just chilling.
They're cute. For some reason, that's what it reminds me of.
Cows?
Yeah, it reminds me of cows. But it reminds me of like the loan sharks. Remember, like back in the day when people would borrow money from these, and then they would do very heinous things.
And that's the thing, right? The Western media is really painting the Chinese to be bad.
To be loan sharks.
Yeah. You think about the loan sharks. Mm-hmm. What do they charge? A quarter on $1. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, you know who's been the worst friend or frenemy? Western partners. Mm-hmm. For the last few hundred years. Seriously, for the last few hundred years, because they'll smile in your face and do dirt in your own backyard. Look at all the Middle Eastern countries that was affected by the crap, even though it's injected some money. But look at all the crap that is injected into the Middle East, and look at the remnants of colonialism from Western civilization in Africa. Yeah, it's still there. Mm-hmm. And who was the counterweight in Africa this whole time? But people don't really pay mind to that. It's been the Chinese since the 1960s, the communist government. Right. And again, why weren't projects successful? Some of it is because of greed. Some of it is because of technical know-how. But don't forget about sabotage from Western entities. Right. And the sad thing about all of it is that when it comes to every government, what ends up happening is that what the governments do end up staining the reputations of the regular people, and that goes everywhere, right? So whatever goes on with China, with the Chinese government and what China is doing, to other people around the world, if we want to put it that way and keep it as simple as possible, then it reflects on people doing heinous things or them trying to justify doing heinous things to Chinese people. And I'm just using Chinese people as an example because that happens with every group when there's aggression happening to another group and they want to find, reasons and excuses to do what it is they want to do to other people, right? To harm another person. Yeah. Right? So they'll use stuff like that as a means to try to get away with something foul. Or, you know what I'm saying? Like similar to the way there was all these aggressions against different Asian people when it came down to the coronavirus, right? It's the very same thing. So, the way our governments handle that virus and the way everything turned out, it ends up affecting the regular people in so many harmful ways. Right, Kung flu. Right, Kung flu. Even though, to an extent, even we
thought that too. Not the Kung Flu part, but we were like, wow, China really dropped the ball, when it came to the coronavirus, and we felt a certain way about that in the very beginning. So it's not like we didn't feel that way too. But at the same time, that doesn't justify, all of the things that started to happen to Asian people throughout the country, right? Throughout the world. Yeah, you're right.
Right. Regular, everyday people have
right.
To do with that
and it's
stuff.
The same thing it's the same. Sorry, I just want to kind of make something clear because I know how people are on here. And the very same thing goes for Americans, right? How we're shitted on, from other parts of the world, and just the regular people that we're shitted on, we're just shitted on so badly, from other parts of the world due to the actions that our government takes, right? So then that kind of leaves us with a really bad reputation. So, I wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. That is very true.
Right.
So, how am I going to flip this? So, I spoke about Chinese business and ventures. Let's talk about Chinese business and ventures within America. So I got some numbers for you guys. And of course it comes from an Asian guy, right? Stupid. So I'm going to break it down to you real easily. So there's about 120,000 people in America that are employed by Chinese companies or American companies that are Chinese owned or have a very large stake in them.
It's crazy.
Okay, so it's 120,000 people, and I'm going to use basic math because it's not the same across every state. So I'm going to just use $10 an hour. So let's take 120,000 people, and we'll multiply that. I don't know where the heck I'm at.
Yeah, we don't know where we are. We're just driving around, so we're getting lost basically.
So 120,000 people, multiply that by $10 an hour. That's $1.2 million. Okay. Now we're going to take that and multiply that not even by a 40-hour work week, by a 35-hour work week. Okay. And then on top of that, we're going to multiply that number by 52 weeks. That takes us to over $2 trillion of people employed by Chinese-related money. Let's call it that for the time being. Now then we're going to take another number, which is about 1 million people are in industries that provide crap to China, whether it's products, technology, services. Okay, that's about 1 million people. We're going to do the same math. $10 an hour, 35 hours a week, over a 1-year period of 52 weeks. Or we can even do that more easily. So that 2-point-something trillion, because a million ain't that far off, just multiply that by 10. So that's about 20, more or less, around 20, well, it's probably more because ain't nobody getting paid $10 an hour like that. All right? So a lot of these jobs are going to be above that. So it's over $20 trillion in jobs that are being provided by Chinese funds or because of relationships with China, let's say. Now, that's why that's a divisive topic when it comes to talking about cutting off economic ties with China, because so many people are going to be affected. So many people are going to be affected. So you can't. So that is that about, how much Chinese money supports people in America, and people don't know that, and people just flap their gums and not knowing the impact that it can possibly have on other people if we did something like that.
Right. Well, basically how much it could impact, the very Americans people's that livelihood. They tend to care about.
People's livelihood.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's real.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
cue me up. What other questions you got?
I don't know. I mean, I think the time with this is good. This one is good. And I think maybe if anything, if you have like more to talk about, you can do it in a separate video, because I think we're almost already 20 minutes in, and I think that's like a good amount of
my problem with this, and I feel like this is not addressed, is that people equate Chinese people or Chinese government to being evil.
Right. That's all. That really has a lot to do with the Western media. And then the thing is that it gets so much deeper, right? Because, and I don't want to do that in this video, all right? But what I will touch on, and what we can do another video on, is that what ends up happening is like, let's say, I'll just use a couple of things as an example when it comes to like Asian people with, you know, these beauty supply store owners, right? And then the aggressions against, you know, other minority groups at these beauty supply stores, right? So then people will use that as a reasoning to go against them, you know, in conjunction with what our media feeds us about Chinese people, Asian people, right? Or, you know, stuff that goes on, you know, and you did touch Africa a little bit, right? But then they'll bring up the aggressions against the Africans by Chinese people, you know what I'm saying, in Africa. You know, I'm just using those two things as an example. So what ends up happening is that people tend to take all of those things and use them as their arguments to have against, you know, a group of people, right? And it's not to say that those things aren't justified. It's not to say that the aggressions and stuff that happen aren't just, you know, because it's when you see those things, and you know, when people's complaints are very justified, you know.
I feel a certain way about that myself. Shoot. Yeah. So it's not.
But I don't. Again, I don't think. Yeah, I think that we should. We'll definitely make that another video, and I'm sure people would want to hear. would want to hear what we have to say about that, because even my own, I even have my own personal experiences that were negative when it came to beauty supply stores, which people may be surprised about, you know. But you know, me being so, you know, white passing, right? But yeah, so I have my own experiences with stuff like that. And, you know, I'll address all of that stuff in another video.
Yeah. And people mix up a lot of things. What happens in this country, things happening here.
Exactly.
Now you just mixing things all over.
Right, and that's really, it's really just, people just use those things as, you know, as talking points to quote unquote hate other groups. But again, it's, you know, it's not to say that people bringing those things up, you know, it's not justified to what you call it, to bring it up. So anyhow, I'm gonna cut this off because I'm just rambling at this point. And yeah, I think you did a really good job. Thank you, Deb.